The nights of the occupation of France were fantastic. Our brothels have never been better cared for. This phrase belongs to Fabienne Jamet, who was a brothel manager at the time of World War II. Starting in 1940, when the troops of the Third Reich invaded the Gallic nation and conquered it effortlessly, the demand for prostitution grew to unsuspected levels. Never before had sex work experienced a golden age like at that time, to such an extent that some of these women were among the most benefited by the presence of Nazism. However, they did not imagine the suffering they would go through once Hitler's soldiers began to withdraw from the country. In the next few minutes we will tell you all about the terrible punishments these women suffered after the liberation of France. Are you ready? Let's get started. Adolf Hitler always affirmed that prostitution was an immoral activity, and described those who exercised it as asocials, that is, criminals who caused the decadence of the Aryan race. However, despite the fact that prostitution was prohibited in Berlin and was viciously persecuted, the Führer did not apply the same laws in the conquered territories. Here, prostitution was not only permitted, but strictly administered by the authorities of the Third Reich. The Wehrmacht considered it inevitable that its soldiers would be tempted by women. Therefore, instead of allowing them to mingle with street prostitutes who would spread venereal disease among the army, the High Command preferred to establish a firm bureaucracy in the brothels. As soon as World War II began, the German army outlined the rules for controlling brothels. These places were divided into two classes. The first of these were the garrison brothels, located in the main urban centers, where there were a greater number of troops stationed and, consequently, more demand for prostitutes. The second was the country brothels, located behind the battle lines of the main war fronts. There, the soldiers who were in combat could request a rest of 1 or 2 days and go to the brothel. For the higher-ups, this was a way to release stress, keep morale high, and prevent defections. Before we go into further details, we want to invite you to discover our new channel, Military Might. Here we'll carry out in-depth analyses of the most powerful, modern, and surprising weapons of war in the world. So, if you like military weaponry, you must check out Military Might. You'll find the link to the channel in the description and in the first comment. Let's go on with our video. Each Wehrmacht brothel was controlled by a military commander, whose task was to maintain order within the establishment and ensure that protocols for accessing its services were followed. The first thing a soldier had to do was undergo a medical inspection, to verify that he did not have any venereal disease. Then, they assigned him to a brothel and gave him a credential that had a space for the prostitute to put her signature. He also received a condom and a spray disinfectant. The man was obliged to disinfect the woman's genitals, and she had to sign the credential. This way, in case someone turned up with a sexually transmitted disease, officers knew who to look for. In 1940, the Nazis occupied France with astonishing speed, and the French army barely managed to resist. With a large number of German soldiers in the country, the demand for prostitutes grew to levels never seen before, thus beginning the golden age of French brothels. At the beginning of the occupation, the main problem the troops encountered was that there were few prostitutes, as many had fled the country upon learning of the invasion. In fact, the military governor of the conquered France, General Dietrich von Koltitz, complained about the shortage of women and denounced that it was a plot by the resistance. This situation, however, began to reverse as the Wehrmacht established high salaries for prostitutes who offered their services. Not only did they earn a lot of money, but they also received gifts such as food, jewelry, luxury items, and even works of art. On the other hand, when a prostitute gained the trust of a German soldier, she began to have his protection, something essential in those uncertain times. According to historians' calculations, the number of prostitutes in Paris increased sixfold during the occupation, reaching about 10,000 in total. All of them worked in brothels supervised by the German authorities. Women who chose to offer their services autonomously, as street prostitutes, were persecuted and imprisoned. On the other hand, rumors spread among sex workers that German soldiers were respectful and much more courteous than French men. Fabienne Jamet was a pimp who owned a luxury brothel who, at the end of the war, wrote a memoir. She refers to this situation as follows: "I remember those SS soldiers, all dressed in black, all so young and beautiful, often endowed with extraordinary intelligence. They even knew how to speak French and English. However, at the same time, the rest of the French population felt a great rejection towards the invaders, and began to brand prostitutes as horizontal collaborators. The hatred towards these women, who were seen as privileged at the expense of the suffering of the French people, silently accumulated until its inevitable outbreak. In 1944, the Allies liberated France and the Nazi brothel system came to an end. The prostitutes who were previously protected by the soldiers of the Third Reich found themselves abandoned in the midst of an angry population, which was determined to take justice into their own hands against all those who had helped the Nazis. Prostitutes were the main target of men who claimed to be avengers of French honor. These women were chased down the street as if it were a hunt, and once they were found, their heads were shaved with a knife. This was a medieval punishment meant to take away what was supposed to be their most seductive attribute. Other prostitutes were beaten, put on a truck and paraded around the city, so that everyone could insult them. Some were smeared with tar, had swastikas drawn on their foreheads, and were forced to parade down the street. Sometimes, the sadism was greater, and the swastika was engraved with a knife, as a way of reminding them for the rest of their days that they had collaborated with the Nazis. The most unfortunate were brutally shot. However, not all those punished by the French people were professional prostitutes. Sometimes they were domestic servants hired by German hierarchs and single women who had rented their room to a soldier to earn extra money. Others were widowed mothers whose husbands had been killed in the war, who had no choice but to accept a relationship with an officer to provide food for their children. The angry mobs made no difference between them, and punished them all equally. Jacques Colville, a British civil servant who was visiting France, remembers it this way: "I watched an open truck go by, accompanied by the insults of the French people, with a dozen miserable women in the back. They were crying and lowering their shaved heads in shame. Disgusted by this cruelty, I thought that the British had not known invasion or occupation for 900 years, so we were in no position to judge them." It is estimated that, at the end of World War II, 80,000 children had been born in France as a result of relations with Nazi soldiers. Finally, in 2009, Germany granted all of them German nationality. We have reached the end of the video and we want to ask you, do you think that French prostitutes were collaborationists? Leave your answer in the comment box below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.